He pointed out a brutal mathematical reality. A young Italian graduate moving to Germany instantly earns an average of 80% more than they would at home country. Welcome back to part two. First, a massive thank you for the incredible enthusiasm and the brilliant insights down in the comment on part one. You proved, guys, that the people are ready to take off the emotional glasses and look at the cold hard mathematics of our economic reality. In our last episode, we unpacked a terrifying mechanics of Europe's demographic doom loop. We saw how a shrinking tax base and exploding fixed cost force a political voting matrix where the politicians are systematically incentivized to squeeze the younger workers just to survive the next election. And we dismantled the corporate myths that AI or mass immigration will magically save us. We left off staring at a broken social contract. But today, we go deeper. In this conclusion to our series, we explore how our system chooses tax capital versus human labor, outline the three terrifying endgames for Europe, and look at the only real way to change the game. Is this truly just a natural disaster of an aging population? Or is the game itself rigged by how we count the money? Let's look at the math. There is a very powerful counter narrative emerging from progressive political economists, including scholars like Richard Murphy, which is one of someone that I am look up to. I'm a big fan of him. So he argued that something that sounds completely radical at first. He said, there is actually no physical pension crisis. There is a political and accounting crisis. Let's unpack that. If a nation produces enough food to feed everyone, builds enough housing to shelter everyone, and generates enough energy to keep everyone warm, then the nation, in real terms, is wealthy enough to support both its young and its old. The physical resources exist. The real crisis is not lack of wealth. It is how our political institution chooses to tax and distribute that wealth. Right now, European welfare states rely almost entirely on taxing labor, income taxes, and payroll contributions taken directly from that stressed 30-year-old worker's payslip. But let's look at the modern economy. Over the last few decades, corporate productivity, automation, and digital capital have skyrocketed while wages have stagnated. Wealth has concentrated heavily in assets like corporate equities and real estate, which are disproportionately owned by the older generations and massive funds. By choosing to fund the social safety net through payroll taxes and human labor, our politicians are creating an artificial economic scarcity. They are trapping the public in a false binary choice. Do we make life miserable for the 30-year-old or do we abandon the 75-year-old? Why do politicians stay fiercely loyal to this false choice? Why don't they just change the rules of the game? Because shifting the tax burden away from a young worker's paycheck and onto accumulated wealth, corporate capital, or land value will trigger a massive, chaotic war with the financial elites who fund the campaigns, by the way, who control the media narratives, and who stabilize the bond markets. For a career politician, a systemic tax reform is a political suicide. Dodging the issue altogether is the ultimate path of the least resistance. Well, if you're missing the whole explanation on how I reached this statement, you can check the previous video about the demographic doom loop. By keeping the young and the old trapped in a vicious cage match, fighting over the absolute crumbs of payroll tax, the political establishment pulls off the ultimate magic trick. They protect themselves from ever having a real, honest conversation about how capital actually flows in advanced capitalism. Here is the problem with playing a zero sum game for too long. Eventually, the players who keep losing will realize that the game somehow is rigged and they will simply flip the board. This is the exact breaking point the Guardian warned about when they described the European social contract as completely unsustainable. When an entire generation of young people wakes up and realizes that no matter how hard they work, they are nothing more than a financial extraction mechanism for an older generation, while while receiving zero housing security, zero childcare support, and absolutely zero guarantee of a future pension. The invisible psychological bond holding a nation together simply snaps. Because this Nash equilibrium prevents politicians from fixing the system from the inside, the system will inevitably be broken from the outside. When a mathematical loop cannot be resolved peacefully, game theory models a terrifying terminal phase. Think of this as an asymptotic decay model, a critical state when the economy essentially consumes itself. In a landmark study on a population decline, the researchers mathematically proved what happens when a wealthy society's population growth turns negative. The economy enters a terminal trajectory because there are no longer enough young minds to generate new ideas, spark technology, or fund infrastructure. State innovation completely stalls out, forcing the entire nation into an inescapable state of permanent economic stagnation. When game theory meets the unyielding math, the system doesn't just slow down, it fractures into three highly disruptive endgames. First, the brain drain, the player exit. In a rigged game, the most rational strategic move for a top player is not to stay and suffer, it is to walk away entirely. The game theorists call this as the player exit. Young, highly educated professionals refuse to stay in an economic environment where they're treated as nothing more than a financial extraction mechanism. We are already seeing this in Southern Europe, and nowhere is this clearer than Italy. In a striking warning to the nation, the governor of the Bank of Italy, Fabio Panetta, explicitly sounded the alarm on how the country's demographic crisis is being radically accelerated by a mass exodus of the youth. He pointed out a brutal mathematical reality: a young Italian graduate moving to Germany instantly earns an average of 80% more than they would at home country. Think about the significance of that layout. Every single year, over 25,000 of Italy's brightest young minds, the software engineers, the medical professionals, and the tech entrepreneurs are making the perfectly rational decision to leave the country. An economic report estimated that this silent brain drain has cost the Italian economy a jaw dropping 160 billion euros in lost human capital. That is a massive number. Italy is effectively investing its taxpayer money to educate its youth only to watch them export their high yielding tax revenues to Northern Europe, leaving the home country older, poorer, and fundamentally starved of the talent needed to survive. Second, systemic radicalization, flipping the board. When mainstream centrist politicians shrug their shoulders and tell the younger generation that this crushing pension math is unchangeable, the youth don't accept the defeat. Instead, they stop voting for moderates. They turn their backs on the political establishment and flock toward the populist anti system parties on the extreme left or extreme right. For decades, the politician scientists operated under the cozy assumption that the young people naturally will vote for the progressive, centrist, or green platforms. But today, the data tells a radically different story. According to the data from the European election study, we are witnessing an unprecedented generational realignment.
The answer might be neither. Vast majority of people aged 16 to 39 gravitate around the political center, with the highest rates of centrism reported in Italy and Germany. Spain stands out for having the biggest left-leaning sentiment among young people, with 28% siding either with the left or the far left. On the other side of the spectrum, Poland has the largest right or far right leaning group at 35%, closely followed by France with 33%. Both also have the largest percentage of young people who identify with the far right specifically, as well as the most frequently reported political divisions.
Look at the five countries in the European Union. The polling shows that over 33% of the young people in France and an astonishing 35% in Poland now openly align with the far right populist factions. But nowhere is this generational rage clearer than in Germany. In federal and state elections, the anti establishment Alternative for Germany, or AFD, completely shattered the expectations, capturing over 21% of the entire 18 to 24-year-old vote. It's nearly doubling its previous youth support. In regions like Thuringia, that number exploded to an unbelievable 38%, making a populist anti system party the single most dominant political force among young voters. Why is this happening? Because these populist movements are not looking to tweak pension formulas by half a percent or adjust a minor tax bracket. They win election by channeling a profound sense of generational alienation. They effectively tie macroeconomic grievances to personal and cultural identity, creating a powerful psychological connection with younger demographics. A key driver of this strategy is their highly optimized social media machine.
Jeder dritte junge Mann hatte noch nie eine Freundin. Du gehörst dazu, schau keine Pornos. Wähl nicht die Grünen. Geh raus an die frische Luft. Steh zu dir. Sei selbstbewusst. Guck geradeaus. Und vor allem, lass dir nicht einreden, dass du lieb, soft, schwach und links zu sein hast. Echte Männer sind rechts. Echte Männer haben Ideale. Echte Männer sind Patrioten. Dann klappt's auch mit der Freundin.
So, when the establishment uses labor taxes to fund an untouchable senior demographic, it forces the youth into an existential corner. Populist leaders lean into this reality, offering a platform to challenge the entire institutional framework, reevaluate historical legacy contracts, and overhaul the established social metrics. If the centrist elite refuses to balance the math, the next generation will simply elect representatives who are more than willing to rewrite the rules entirely. The third one, economic sclerosis, the living museum. If the borders stay locked and the population remains compliant, the final destination is a slow, agonizing economic paralysis. As mandatory pension and elderly health care liabilities consume an ever growing share of national GDP, the state loses its ability to build for the future. This is not a speculative prediction. I don't speculate this. I hope I can, but my knowledge has not reached that point yet. So, this is not a speculation from me. It is official warning issued by the European establishment itself. In a report on the future of the European competitiveness, the former European Central Bank President Mario Draghi explicitly warned that the continent faces a slow agony of terminal economic decline if it fails to fix its structural productivity crisis. Draghi's data exposed a devastating innovation deficit. Capital is the fuel for future growth, and Europe is running on empty. Due to a fragmented financial market and a massive fiscal drag from aging demographics, European startups receive a staggering 80% less venture capital funding than the companies in the United States. Look at the critical battleground of artificial intelligence. Research reveals that the US directs nearly 14 times more private capital into AI development than the entire European Union combined. When the state budgets are fundamentally forced to prioritize the past over the future, public funding for the venture capital, modern infrastructure, and breakthrough technologies completely dries up. Every spare euro is swallowed by historical legacy welfare obligations. Europe risks transforming into a giant economic museum. Beautiful, historic, and highly cultured, but structurally stagnant, financially zombified, and utterly incapable of competing against younger, hyper aggressive global economies. At the end of the day, you can spin political narratives, you can print fiat currency, and you can distract the public with culture wars, but you cannot outplay the rules of game theory, and you certainly cannot outrun the math. So, where does this leave us? If we stop wasting our time blaming individual politicians and instead realize that they are just prisoners of a mathematically flawed democratic matrix, the path forward becomes clear. The solution is not to vote for better people. The solution is to change the payoff structure of the game. Europe cannot survive if it continues to pit the survival of its grandparents against the future of its grandchildren. We have to fundamentally decouple retirement security from the direct, aggressive exploitation of the young labor. As political economists like Richard Murphy point out, a real pension is not a piggy bank of paper money. It is a social contract based on real world infrastructure. And to save this contract, we have to look past the false choices of the establishment, whether that means shifting the tax metrics away from active payslip and onto accumulated capital gains and land values, or automating productivity so deeply that the technology funds a baseline dignity for all citizens. The rule must be rewritten. We must value generational equity. But until we collectively realize that this is a systemic structural mathematical trap the demographic doom loop will only spin faster. The 30-year-old space slip will get smaller. The 75-year-old's future will get more fragile. That's the reality. Now, I want to hear from you, especially if you're living this reality in Europe right now. If you are a young professional, do you feel like you have been turned into a financial extraction mechanism? Or if you are a retiree, do you feel like you've been handed a broken promise despite your lifetime of hard work? Let's talk about this in the comment section below, but keep it civil, keep it analytical. If this perspective challenge how you think about politics and economics, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share this with someone who needs to see the bigger picture. And as always, sapere aude, dare to know, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao!